What is at stake for the 2020 election? How did COVID-19 possibly affect the elections coming up? And could our religious liberties and freedoms be affected if we don't get out and vote? For the answers to these questions, I want you to stay tuned because my guest is going to share all with us about God, Trump, the 2020 election, and COVID-19. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Glory Road Show. I'm your host, Candice Smithyman, and I'm excited today because my guest is the founder and CEO of Charisma Media. He was also stamped by Time Magazine as one of the 25 most influential evangelicals in America. He's interviewed more than 4 presidents and been on multiple media news sites to talk about a variety of different subjects, including God and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump and election 2020, and now about COVID as well, and how COVID is affecting and could possibly affect the polls coming up. So I'm excited today to bring on my friend, Stephen Strang.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you.
I'm happy to have you with me, Stephen. It's really amazing to see what has been happening in the country recently. All the things that are going on, the shakeup that's happened from COVID-19. And I really want to hear straight from you, since you took the time to write this book, how all of this is affecting us now and how it could possibly affect the elections.
Well, to me, it's pretty obvious. You know, we're a very divided country, and there are some people that want Donald Trump out so badly, they don't care what happens. I mean, some have been even hoping for a recession because he did such a great job with the economy and job numbers. They knew that a recession was probably the thing that would make people vote him out more than anything else. In fact, when I wrote God, Trump in the 2020 election, the very first chapter was why he must win, which is basically what we're talking about now. My second chapter is why he might lose. And at the time I wrote it in late 2019, the economy was booming. But I said that one of the things that might cause him to lose is that if the economy tanked. And we saw in the month of March this year that all of the gains that had been made in 3 years were lost in basically 3 weeks. Now, since then, the economy has bounced back. It's still not to where it was. But as we move forward, I think we need someone like Donald Trump to lead us out of this thing. But the other side is using anything at all to get him. So let's review. First of all, it was the Russian hoax, which was totally, completely discredited. I mean, it's not even like a little bit of it was true, and it was blown out of proportion. It was completely a hoax. That didn't work. So they tried impeachment. That didn't work. And then out of the blue came this novel coronavirus from China. It was something that as recently as New Year's or the first part of January, none of us would have thought would happen. In the middle of January, China was still saying that it could not be transferred human to human. And then we see that it's basically shut down not only America, but the whole world. And it's pretty scary because the Chinese who are developing these things in a lab, which I go through in my book in some detail, have found that all they have to do is release a virus. I mean, we saw what happened with SARS, the swine flu. They were both pretty bad, but nothing like this. And at first, we didn't know if it'd be like the bubonic plague, where a third of Europe was killed or died at one point, or even the Spanish flu a little more than 100 years ago, where 500,000 Americans died. And that was with a population of about 100 million, which is less than a third of what it is now. In some ways, it was much more devastating. The COVID-19 is not good. People have died. We're not happy about it, but it is not the disaster that people have said. Yet the left, and I don't even say Democrats, because this is much more than partisan politics. In fact, I make the point in the book that there's not that much difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. Just look what happens when we change parties in the White House or change parties in Congress. Not a whole lot changes. Donald Trump has been a disruptor in lots and lots of ways. We needed a disruptor. We needed to disrupt the status quo, and he's done that. I think that's why people hate him so much. So here you have this pandemic, and it shuts everything down. It shuts down the economy. At first, the Democrats were making fun of him when he shut down the borders, but the fact he did that probably kept, and of course, I'm just guesstimating based on my own research and what I read, is that it would have been at least twice as bad, because a whole lot more infected people would have come into the country, and that would have spread and spread and spread. That's what viruses do. That's why we use the term virus with the internet, that a story will just go and go and go like a virus grows. And so the left finally has something they can beat up Donald Trump about. I mean, I saw an ad the other day where they said 150,000 people have died because of Donald Trump. I mean, that is completely idiocy. I mean, people who say that in other settings, they would say they were insane and should be in an asylum somewhere. It is not his fault. It came from China. It's nature. Viruses happen all the time. In fact, there's evidence that the death rate is not a whole lot worse than the common flu. It's just that we've learned to live with the common flu, and we don't think about it very much. And it's not tied to Donald Trump. So anything Donald Trump does, when he shut down the borders, he was being xenophobic. Nancy Pelosi went to Chinatown on purpose to show that it was safe. I mean, all of these kind of things happen. And now they're saying they changed their tune. I did an article about that this week. They changed the tune. And now they say he didn't act soon enough, and the virus is his fault. And I think they're dragging it out with all this fear. I have some Democratic friends. Actually, they're people I know. I don't really consider them friends for a variety of reasons, but they won't leave their house because they're so afraid they might get this virus. The fact is that I don't remember the statistics exactly, but it's close to 99% of the people recover. Most of us who are healthy will recover. Over half the people who died were senior citizens or people with very, very difficult health problems. We all know that a lot of times pneumonia is what kills people when they're old, but actually they were really sick with something else, and finally they catch pneumonia, and that's what takes them out. And that's what's happened with COVID-19. It doesn't mean that we don't want to be, responsible and take precautions. But first of all, you got to be around somebody that has the virus. You can't get it just out of thin air. And then their droplets or whatever, you have to get on you. I mean, this is how the common flu is spread as well. And they say that if you stay 6 feet away from someone, you won't get it. And but the problem is you can't always stay 6 feet apart, if you're at the grocery store or whatever. So you wear a mask. But there's even a debate about the mask. At first in March, they told us that the mask didn't help. Now in the state of Florida, it's mandatory when you go out in public, you need to have a mask on. And, there are some exceptions. Once you get into a place, you can take it off at a gym or a restaurant or something like that. Of course, you can't eat if you have a mask on. So, I mean, there's all this stuff, and it could affect the election because, first of all, there's fear. There's turmoil. It gives the Dems a talking point. I mean, Donald Trump has done so great. He's made promises. He's kept his promise. I mean, tell me what politician does that? Did George H.W. Bush when he said, "Read my lips, no new taxes"? I don't think so. Did George W. Bush when he said he'd move the embassy to Jerusalem on the first day of his term? Of course, he never did it. And I mean, there are so many examples of that, but Donald Trump has done it, even though he has been fought every inch of the way. The Democrats fight him on things that they first supported. A lot of them supported building sections of the wall, back in the Obama administration, and even before that, the wall has been partially built for a long, long time. But when Donald Trump wanted to do it, suddenly they're against it. It is, I believe it's spiritual warfare. This is much more than just common everyday garden brand politics. It's actually spiritual warfare. And the only thing they have is just to stir things up, have there be such chaos that people don't know what to do. They throw up their hands. They maybe stay home from the polls, which is another reason why he might lose, is if the people who are more conservative and who actually want law and order, hello. I mean, the Democrats are even being supportive of these rioters. Look at California. Churches are still shut down in California as being non-essential, but the protesters have a constitutional right to protest without masks and without social distancing. Isn't that interesting? But sitting 6 feet away from somebody in church worshiping the Lord is somehow a health issue. I mean, they even made a mandate from the governor that if you're in church, and it's got to be under 10 people, you can't sing or chant because the droplets might get out or something. I mean, it's idiocy. It's absolute idiocy. And if nothing else, this pandemic has shown us what a lot of these left-leaning politicians, whether mayors or governors, will do to suppress our rights, our religious freedoms. We have a constitutional right to worship. Our constitutional rights do not end because a bunch of medical people have said that we have a health crisis. Now, we have the freedom to worship. We also have the freedom to stay home if people are afraid to go out. But for the government to shut it down and to arrest pastors, I've done a number of podcasts on my Strang Report podcast with pastors that were arrested or threatened to be arrested if they just had church. In Kentucky, even one pastor that had drive-in church where the people stayed in their own car. Yet the liquor stores and the abortion clinics are open in Kentucky. It is just idiocy. And we have seen this coming. We who are more conservative, certainly those of us who are Christians, have seen this coming for years. It started a long time ago, inch by inch by inch. They've been getting their way. Suddenly, Donald Trump is here. He's disrupting everything. They're not getting their way, and they're coming unglued. And not only that, but they're saying things about socialism. Even Joe Biden, who has always been kind of a middle-of-the-road Democrat his entire career, has embraced things that are basically socialism. It's possible that we could slide into a situation like Venezuela, which until a few years ago was the most prosperous country in South America, and that included more prosperous than Brazil. Part of it was their oil industry, but it is like a third world country. When I was writing my book, I actually wrote about Venezuela and what happened, and they had 10 million% inflation. I can't even get my brain around that number. And people are hungry. And, people would have said it would never happen in Venezuela. Now, America is stronger to start with. We've got more constitutional rights, although the Venezuelan constitution was kind of copied after ours, believe it or not. I was surprised to find that out. But it's almost like we're sinking into chaos. I was talking to a historian, and we were talking about how in some ways it resembles the French Revolution, where there were just mobs of people, and the only thing they wanted was to get the king out. And now there's mobs of people, and it seems like all they want is to get Trump out, and they want to take power. And when they have power, we will see laws. They'll decide what laws to enforce and not enforce. They'll decide who to persecute and prosecute. And a lot of these people are anti-God, anti-church, anti-Christian. And in some ways, we're vulnerable like the Jews in Germany. We'd like to think that would never happen. But listen, we ever think that Portland would see riots every single night for what is it now, more than 70 days in a row? Riots die out after a couple of days. They just do. These are anarchists who have an agenda, who are in a situation where they know they can get away with it. They're not being arrested. They're not being prosecuted to a large extent. And listen, if they can get away with it in Portland, it's just a matter of time until it comes to the city where you live. And in fact, it is in different cities. You know, Chicago, Los Angeles, Seattle have all had a lot of unrest as well. And it's very, very concerning. These are big problems. They're going to continue after the election. They'll continue after Donald Trump is out. But for right now, he is our best hope. And it isn't just to keep the Democrats out of power. All they do is they lust for power. They're hoping that they will get power by hook or by crook. And, you know, right now the thing in the news is about the balloting or the voting by mail. And, you know, there are a couple of states that want to send a ballot to every single mailbox. Now, isn't that secure? You know, they send it to people who are actually dead and their name just hasn't been taken off the roll, or maybe they moved and they never bothered to tell the people they moved. People can walk down the street and steal them out of mailboxes. I mean, at least in my neighborhood, the mailbox is out by the street. You don't even know that the ballot's necessarily there. They can be counterfeited. And I'm just concerned that there's going to be so much fraud. And it's not like it hasn't happened before. It's happened all the time. Let me be more careful in how I say it. Not every election, not every precinct, not every state is corrupt. But the corruption that happens is almost always on the Democratic side. The Republicans more have their act together. And this isn't to say that they're perfect, because they're not. But I saw a meme that said that there was a new poll, a CNN poll, that showed that Joe Biden was ahead of Trump by, you know, some big margin in all the cemeteries in America. And of course, it was a joke that, you know, dead people vote Democrat. You never hear about dead people voting Republican. It's just fraud. And if it's a little tiny bit of fraud and the election is overwhelming in one side or the other, it doesn't affect anything. But when these elections are close, look what happened in 2018 in California. In some of the Republican areas in Southern California, there's a whole part of California that's pretty conservative. They're just about a third of the state, so they can't win any elections statewide. At the last minute, they were finding boxes of ballots that had not been counted. Surprise, surprise. In my own state of Florida, they found the same thing in Broward County. At the last minute, they found a whole box of ballots in the trunk of a rental car. Boy, we need to count these. And isn't it interesting that when you count them, they're almost all Democrat. And if we had this kind of fraud, Donald Trump could lose. And if he loses, we lose. It's not just the Republicans losing power and a bunch of bureaucrats up there that have nice, cushy jobs might lose their job. I mean, all that happens. That's just the ebb and flow of politics. But our rights are at stake. And if we lose this, we may never get it back in our lifetime. America may never be the same. And I'm not one to be an alarmist, but it is that serious. And my concern is that Christians are asleep at the wheel. And these pastors whose churches are going to be greatly reduced, who knows, the government may even try to tell them how to preach. It happened in Houston, where they had a lesbian mayor. She was openly lesbian. And there was some kind of a vote about like transgender bathrooms or something like that. It was a couple of years ago. I may be wrong, but and there are a bunch of preachers that were having rallies at church and saying, we got to turn out the vote and we can't vote this in. She was so mad, she subpoenaed their sermon notes to try to say that they were doing hate speech from the pulpit and should be prosecuted. Now, the good guys won that one, and that woman is out of power now. But it's an example of what would happen. I don't think ever before in American history were sermon notes subpoenaed or were sermons called hate speech. But they've so flipped things that it's like anything they call hate speech, which is stuff that doesn't agree with them. And that includes nickel and dime policy things that doesn't agree with them, but especially when preachers, powerful preachers, are preaching the word of God about righteousness and sin. The Bible calls sin, sin. And there are people who like to do the sin and they don't like anybody calling them out about it. And so they say it's hate speech because they're being hateful for saying something mean. I mean, it's almost that juvenile in how they say it. And the problem is that these things are starting to get on the law books. They have laws in Canada like that now. Some of the Supreme Court decisions that have come down definitely back the gay, lesbian, LGBT community in lots of ways that is really a violation of our Christian rights. America really needs to turn back to God. It does not need to turn to a politician or a political party. It needs to turn back to God. Mm-hmm. But Donald Trump has at least been the champion of the things that we find important. And also, he does not embrace these things that I've been describing that we just think are frankly very scary.
Oh, amen. Wow. Stephen, that was so awesome and so true. Now, I want to make sure that people know how to get your book. So we're going to put your book up on the screen here. Folks, make sure you go to Get God, Trump, and COVID-19, How the Pandemic is Affecting Christians, the World, and America's 2020 Election. You can get that at stevestrangbooks.com. And also, I just want to mention that Charisma has a tremendous amount of amazing e-courses and podcasts. I'm blessed to have both an e-course and a podcast with Charisma. So make sure you check out their e-courses and podcasts. Go to charismaecourses.com. And you can personally go to my podcast, Manifest His Presence, at charismapodcastnetwork.com as well. And subscribe to that through Apple, through Spotify, or Google Play. Love to have you listen to that as well. Now, Stephen, I would like to talk a little bit about this book. Was really powerful, by the way. It's a small book. It's a quick, easy read for people to really get updated on the issues. And there were a lot of points in there. You have a tremendous amount of points that you just brought up here at the beginning of the interview. But I want to talk a little bit about, I'm personally saddened, as I know you are, and I can hear it in your voice, about this Marxist socialist agenda that is consistently trying to sneak its way into everything. And if we don't get out and vote, and we don't start preparing ourselves, just like you said, we will not be the country that we are today. And of course, we're on shaky ground today because we don't even look strong as we did even last year because of all this that has come against Donald Trump. And so I really want the people to understand, if you wouldn't mind just elaborating a little bit on the seriousness of having Marxism and socialism in our country. What would that do to the demise of the United States of America if we don't put a stop to that kind of agenda that's going on? What would we look like as a nation if we allow this to continue to creep in and we don't stop it at the polls?
We know socialism and communism are two variations almost of the same concept. Communists do tend to take over by military force. They did it in Russia in 1918. Socialism tends to get in at the ballot box somehow and doesn't tend to have guns. But the thing is that every single country where this has been tried has turned out like Venezuela, even China. In fact, China only has prospered partly because their people are still dirt poor, but they have implemented some capitalism. Socialism is that everything is owned by the government, everything, and they decide, who gets what. I went to the Soviet Union before and after the fall of communism, and people ask me what it's like, and I said, suppose that the U.S. Post Office ran everything, including the grocery stores and everything else. You get kind of an idea of just how it was. The shelves were bare. Housing was very low level. People had no incentive to, work hard and to improve themselves. It's failed everywhere, and it's a godless theology. It's based on atheism. There is not one socialist country in the world where they have robust religious freedom, not one. So if socialism goes in, our economy will tank, people will lose. There's different levels of it where they first nationalize the big companies, so that means that the government would take over Amazon or Delta Airlines or all this kind of stuff. But eventually they come down and take people's houses. In Russia, they didn't. Nobody owned their land, really. Sometimes they'd have a little garden plot, but I don't think they owned it. I think they were allowed to use it. And America will quit being the great country it is. We'll Democracy is not going to be safe. In fact, I did a podcast yesterday with an Australian pastor who has actually prophesied that Donald Trump would win. He's very, very interested in this election. And he said down in Australia, they say if the United States sneezes, the Australians catch cold. I mean, what we do affects the whole world. That's why so much is important. There is a move in the world toward globalism. And I go into this in my books as well. The Bushes, Obama, all those people were kind of easing the country towards some kind of globalism, where we don't really have borders and we don't have tariffs, kind of like the European Union. That is only a mild version of what these radicals, and they really are, they're anarchists. They're anarchists. Before it seemed like we were just kind of dealing with the globalism issue. But a lot of Christians are just blind to this. They have their job and they go to church and they're trying their best to raise their kids. And politics is kind of dirty, and the other side is mean. And thankfully Christians are pretty nice. They don't a lot of times even know what to say if people are mean to them. My own sister-in-law, who's a real sweet Christian lady, in fact, she has been a missionary for many years. She was in a store minding her own business, but she had a Donald Trump mask on. And this big, I didn't see the lady, but she described her as a kind of big, horsey kind of woman, was actually stalking her and harassing her all over the store because she had on a Donald Trump mask. And my sister-in-law didn't know what to do. I said, you should have called the store manager or the police. I mean, this lady was totally out of line in what she was saying and doing. She was trying to totally intimidate my sister-in-law, who's a little petite thing. And, I'm just giving a little anecdotal evidence, but really socialism is bad. It's atheistic. America will become more like Venezuela, hopefully never that bad. But we have an opportunity for exactly the opposite to be true, where Donald Trump wants to make America great, bring back manufacturing jobs, secure our borders, support Israel, which is very important to Christians. I go into this in my book as well. All of these issues that I wrote about in 2019 are still valid, but we just had no way of knowing, or at least I didn't when I wrote it, about impeachment. It was just starting when the book went to press. The book came out in January, which is was the same month that the impeachment trial started. And of course, we'd never heard of the pandemic. So in April, I took 3 weeks and wrote this book. It's only 125 pages. But because the pandemic adds to the issue, like I was talking about earlier, and of course, if the pandemic had happened in 2019, earlier in the year, I would have included a lot of these things. And I go into a lot about how we are losing our religious freedoms. Some very, very troubling trends have emerged. And also, both of these books talk about the spiritual dimension, and there is a spiritual dimension. As Christians, we know that the spiritual world is as real as the physical world. The average person who doesn't know God, they think it's science and it's this and that. They don't understand the spiritual dimension, but prophets have prophesied. In fact, God, Trump, and COVID-19 kind of ends with quoting some prophets that believe that a great revival, in fact, more than just a revival is reviving Christians, but a transformation and awakening in our nation will come from this. In the natural, it's hard to see how that happens, but there have been great awakenings during very difficult times in history. And if we had time, I'm enough of an amateur historian that I can kind of talk people through that. In fact, as a journalist, I've had to learn how to take kind of complex things and kind of say them in a way that average people can understand. Of course, you lose a lot of detail in that, but at least to help people understand and have a perspective, because we don't really teach history very well in this country. And now they're teaching revisionist history in a way that's actually startling. And some of the great American patriots who built our country, our founding fathers, I mean, they're trashing them. Look about pulling over the statues and so forth. They're trying to destroy everything that's made America great and to remake it into a Marxist socialist country. It hasn't happened yet. We still have rights. We can still vote. But, if this trend continues, it's just going to be more and more and more chaos. And we cannot let the left get in. In fact, we need to do the opposite. We need to turn out in such force that we punish them at the polls. And if there is an overwhelming landslide for Donald Trump, that will set these people back years. And there's a Jewish author named Daniel Horowitz who wrote a book called Blitz. I'm reading it right now, and he predicts more than I do that Donald Trump is going to win by a landslide. I happen to think that the race is going to be pretty close. And in some of the key states, there's going to be so much fraud that some of the states may go against him. I do believe that he will win. I think that the average American who is very quiet and doesn't say much, and they keep their head down, they're hoping that the bad guys will leave them alone. I don't think that they want the anarchy. They don't want the department stores burning. They don't want statues pulled over. They don't like what they see in the schools. They know that there's something wrong if there's just open borders. I mean, every country in the world, including Canada, and we saw this during COVID. All these countries shut their borders. I mean, surprise, surprise, they wanted to control who came in. And in fact, our border was shut because they figured out that the illegal immigrants, some of them were bringing COVID into the country. I mean, isn't that interesting? And now you don't hear about it very much in the news. But I think that the average person, the person who's watching, the person who goes to your church, they understand that there's wrong. And I think that they're going to come out and vote for Donald Trump. I really do. I think the left has overplayed its hand. They have a very weak candidate in both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Very, very weak. But there's such a hatred for Trump that all these people are rallying behind these candidates because that's all they have. Those of us who believe the Bible, believe in Judeo-Christian values, and so forth, we have got to rally around our candidate as well. Is he perfect? Of course not. No candidate is perfect. I mean, some of the debate, even among Christians and never Trumpers, I deal with this in my books too. I just think, they're basically liberal Christians who always vote Democrat, and they've come out against Trump because, and they're hypocrites. They think some tweet he said didn't show the love of Jesus. Jesus himself took a whip and threw out the money changers. And he was very, very strong against the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He called them whitened sepulchres full of dead man's bones. I mean, that was pretty, do I call it hate speech? I mean, nowadays, the politically correct people would, but I mean, that was pretty strong. Jesus was also gentle, but we have to be, the Bible tells us to be gentle as doves and as wise as serpents. And I'm just very concerned that Christians are not registering to vote. They're not going to the polls. We need to register to vote. We need to encourage everybody in our church, in our family, in our neighborhood to go to the polls. We need to help people go to the polls. I've actually driven people myself to the polls in different years, when maybe people didn't have transportation for some reason. I make sure that my 91-year-old mother gets to the polls because obviously she's not able to drive right now. She's in quarantine because of coronavirus. If that's the case, I'll get her an absentee ballot. And, and then I'm doing everything I can, writing these books, doing everything we can on Charisma Media, through our websites and our magazines. Our cover story in our October issue of Charisma is going to be on the election and talking about the very same kinds of issues that you and I are talking about. It's my attempt to wake up the church. And I just applaud you so much for using your platform. A lot of Christians are like, they're really afraid that somebody might criticize them and quit giving money to the church or something. I mean, what's at stake is so far beyond that. It is so far beyond it. That's like a merchant being afraid that, well, maybe if I carry this merchandise or the price is too high, somebody won't come, or maybe the customer service isn't good. And then the looters come in to burn the store. I mean, all that other stuff is so inconsequential because of the new crisis at hand. And, I'm speaking in hyperbole. I realize it's extreme, but it's my way to try to make people wake up and think, because you don't hear people talking like this on the network news, with very, very few exceptions. And if they do, they don't talk about it from a spiritual point of view, and they don't say that they're hoping and praying that God will send a great awakening in this country. By the way, let me just say that on September 26th, the last Saturday in September, there's going to be a great rally on the Mall in Washington, D.C. called The Return. Rabbi Jonathan Cahn is going to be there, and leading it is an attempt to get Christians to come together and to pray for forgiveness on behalf of our nation, and to call the nation to return to God and to its Bible values. There'll be a lot more about it. I just thought I'd throw in a good word, and it'll be live streamed around the world for those who aren't able to go to Washington, D.C., but it looks like it's actually going to happen. It may not be as big as it would have been otherwise, but it doesn't matter. The prayers are going to go up, the sermons preached. Hopefully the media will take notice, although they'll cover 10 people protesting in front of the Supreme Court for one of their leftist causes. And if there's 100,000 Christians on the Mall, they act like it's no big deal. I mean, it's horrible hypocrisy. The media is the big part of that. And I say that as someone who's part of the media. I mean, what we do, we call Christian media. Name of my company is Charisma Media. But the left-wing press is part of the problem. It's just people who don't know God, who apparently don't love God. We don't want to judge hearts one by one. The Bible tells us not to judge. But as a group, I think it's pretty clear what their agenda is, that they're against Donald Trump. And we need to not listen to those people. Too many Christians spend too much time paying attention to liberal media, or worse than that, social media. Some of the stuff on social media is absolutely abhorrent. Of course, we also have the right to put up the truth on social media. And I encourage people to do that. Do it in love, but speak up. Don't make it seem like the other side is totally won, because they haven't. God is still on the throne. Prayer still changes things. We have a chance. And one of the biggest chances we have, Candice, is to turn out on November 3rd, 2020, and re-elect Donald Trump by a landslide, and also vote against these leftist governors and mayors, many of whom their states are in a total mess because of their policies. They're kind of liberal policies that tend towards socialism. Thankfully, they're not totally socialist, because we have a constitution in our country and the laws have not been changed, but it could happen. Hopefully it won't happen. Hopefully it won't happen because we wake up. Sometimes you sound an alarm because, saying that something terrible is going to happen in order to keep it from happening. And that's what I'm doing now. My books are really an apologetic. I try to present the facts. I try to be reasonable, like I'm trying to be right now and talking to you. Lots of footnotes. I don't say a lot of crazy things. I put in lots of disclaimers, even as I do right now. But I think it'll give people a way to understand things much more clearly than this short interview. And I even give people kind of talking points when they're talking to neighbors or people at work who don't agree like we do, but to help them see the light. We've got to win the other side over. Yesterday, or actually today, I did a podcast with Diamond and Silk. And, these are two very funny, feisty Black ladies who were Democrats most of their life. And they've come over to be big backers of Donald Trump. And that's happened many, many times. And we need more things like this. I actually interviewed them last week, and we put up the podcast today, as they asked, the day that we're taping this. And people can check that out if they want to at my Strang Report on the Charisma Podcast Network. Notice how I worked that in, Candice.
I'm so glad you did, Stephen, because that way people are going to know they can go to charismapodcastnetwork.com. They can subscribe to your podcast and to mine.
And yours. That's right. Yeah, we're excited to have you on our podcast. Thank you. And also, I'll just tell you a thank you. When God and Donald Trump came out, your interview, I remember going up to Jacksonville to do it. This is much more convenient, by the way, but it was one of the first interviews I did, and it really helped me because I was kind of practicing how to be natural in front of the camera. So thank you for that early support you gave me.
Oh, you bet. Anytime. And I'd like to have you back on again a few times before the election, if you'd be willing to do that. I feel like there's some real intensive issues that we didn't even get into today. You're a man that is full of a wealth of knowledge for what is getting ready to happen. And I need you to know, Stephen, that the Lord spoke to me specifically about having you on. Really, it's not my brand to do anything that is kind of in line with this, but you and I have a good relationship, and I really heard the voice of the Lord speak to me multiple times saying, you need to have Stephen Strang on your show. And so I'm really excited that this is the way that I can contribute to what is happening to get people ready for this election. I believe in my heart that we as Christians need to stand up and fight. It is not a time that we pull back. It's not a time that, we pull the covers over our head and say, woe is me, look what's happening. But Jesus has given us everything that we need and the power of the Holy Spirit to go forth. And we are called in this spiritual battle, and it truly is a spiritual battle, to fight the enemy. And so you're a motivational speaker there, somebody that can get us revved up to get out there and do it, to get off our behinds and step into position and really move forward and get out there and vote any way that we possibly can. Because folks, I really believe in my heart, I know God spoke it to me, and he said, listen, you got to have Stephen on, because this is a serious matter. And I believe it's a serious matter for a whole lot of reasons. But if our Constitution and capitalism does not stay into place, we're going to see the demise of our country. And how Donald Trump says he wants to make America great. Everything is trying to make America not great. Everything that we're watching, everything that we're seeing, and it's a bunch of lies. And so the people of God have been given a mandate to stand up and fight. And I just want to encourage pastors, preachers, leaders everywhere, all over the planet, especially the United States, since we're the one that has the vote, to stand up, pray, fight, get out there to the polls. Our freedom demands that we get up and start moving, and who Christ set free is free indeed. And so it is for freedom that he died, to give us everything that we have today, and we cannot lose this. And so, Stephen, that is my little bit of being able to be a part of a much grander scale of the fight to see democracy stay in place. So I thank you so much that you enabled me to be able to share that as well.
Thank you. And I hope that other leaders, other Christian leaders, pastors' wives will see you as a model for what they need to do in their own ministries. You're right. Christians usually don't get involved in politics, but this is not politics as usual. This is a war, like you said. We see it as a spiritual war. The Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And we know that God is still on the throne. And we believe that ultimately our citizenship is in heaven, not here on earth. But while we're here, we have a responsibility. And I'm trying to do what I can do. You're doing what you can do. And we just need thousands and tens and hundreds and millions of other Christians to do what they can do. And many are, but not enough. And we only have, just barely over 2 months before the election. And, things are still going to be bad in a lot of ways after Donald Trump is elected. And I'm saying that in faith. And I think there's evidence to believe that will happen. But we're in a very serious place in our country. And really what we really need is a change of hearts, like I was talking before, and we need to return to God. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
You bet. It was truly my pleasure. And again, please go to stevestrangbooks.com and pick up God, Trump, and COVID-19 so you can understand a little bit how this pandemic is affecting Christians, the world, and how it's going to affect the election if we do not get out there and vote. Also, subscribe to our podcast, both Stephen's and mine, at charismapodcastnetwork.com. And also go to Charisma e-courses. There's a variety of different authors there who have their e-courses at charismaecourses.com. It's a great way for you to learn and grow in the Lord. Stephen, thank you so much again for being with me today. It truly was a blessing and an honor.
God bless you.
You too. And for those of you who watch, remember, you're on a glory road straight to his throne. Until next time.